The day my brother handed me a pen and said, "Sign it, or I'll make sure you never work in this state again," I realized he had been planning this for years. I was 31. I had just buried my father, and the man standing across the conference table from me, using a voice I had known my whole life, was not grieving. He was collecting. "My name is Lena, and I need to tell you what happened, because if I don't, I think I'll convince myself it wasn't real. My father built Kellner Fabrication from nothing. That's not a figure of speech. He literally started it in a rented garage in Dayton, Ohio, with 2 employees and a used press brake he bought off a guy in Cincinnati. By the time I was in middle school, it was a mid-size manufacturing company with contracts across the Midwest. By the time I graduated college, it employed over 200 people. My father was not a flashy man. He drove a used F-150 and ate lunch at his desk. But he had built something real, and he was proud of it. And he had always said that when he was gone, the company would be divided equally between me and my brother. My brother's name is Conrad. Conrad is 4 years older than me, which meant he got to the company first. He started working there right after college, learned the floor, learned the clients, learned my father's handshake deals and his supplier relationships. By the time I joined 7 years ago, Conrad was already embedded. He knew everyone. He had opinions about everything. And slowly, quietly, the way water erodes stone, he had made himself indispensable. I didn't see it as a threat. He was my brother. We weren't close the way some siblings are. We didn't call each other on weekends or text funny videos, but we were family. I thought we were on the same side. My father was diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's 3 years ago. He managed it for a while, kept showing up, kept making decisions, but the disease moved faster than any of us wanted to admit. Last November, he passed. The funeral was on a Thursday. By the following Monday, Conrad had called a meeting. He did not call it that, of course. He said he wanted to align on next steps and make sure the transition was smooth. He said this in the tone people use when they have already decided what the transition looks like and just need you to show up and ratify it. I drove to the office that morning with my travel mug and my grief, and I sat down across from Conrad and a man named Mr. Whitfield, who was introduced to me as the company's new legal advisor. I had never heard of Mr. Whitfield. My father had used the same attorney for 20 years, a woman named Patricia, who had drawn up his original will and every amendment since. Patricia was not in the room. Mr. Whitfield slid a document across the table. Conrad said, "It's straightforward. You take a buyout, I take operational control. It's better for the company. You were never really operations anyway." I looked at the number on the buyout offer. It was less than a third of what my half of the company was worth. I had done enough financial modeling in my years there to know that immediately. I also noticed that the document was dated 2 weeks before my father died. I said, "I need to have Patricia review this." Conrad said Patricia retired. She had not. I knew she had not, because Patricia had sent me a card when my father passed, and in the card she had included her cell number and said to call if I needed anything. I picked up my bag. I said I would be in touch. Conrad said, "Lena, don't make this complicated. Dad wanted this." I stopped walking. I turned around. He said it again. "Dad wanted this. He told me himself. You were never built for this. You know that." I left without answering him. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. I was trying to understand what I had just heard from a person I had known my entire life. I was trying to locate somewhere in my memory any version of my father that would have said those words. I couldn't find it. I called Patricia that afternoon. She had not retired. She was surprised to hear from me. And then she was not surprised at all. And there was something in the way her voice went quiet that told me she already had some shape of what was happening. She asked me to come in the next morning. What Patricia told me was this: 6 months before my father died, while he was still legally competent, but beginning to decline, Conrad had requested a meeting with Patricia. He had wanted to make changes to the succession plan. Patricia had documented the meeting and declined to make the changes, citing concerns about undue influence. She had advised my father to discuss it with me. My father, whether out of exhaustion or denial or some private calculation I will never fully understand, had not mentioned it to me. Conrad had then found Mr. Whitfield. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my apartment in the dark, and I thought about every conversation I'd had with Conrad in the past 2 years. The times he'd casually mentioned that I seemed stressed. The times he'd suggested I might be happier in a different role, something more strategic, less day-to-day. The holiday dinner where he'd said in front of our aunts and uncles that I had always been the creative one, implying without saying it that creative was the opposite of capable. He had been building a case, not for a court, but for a narrative. The story that Lena was not really a part of the company she'd worked in for 7 years. The story that Lena would be better off elsewhere. He'd been telling it so quietly for so long that I had almost started to believe it. Patricia filed a formal challenge to the buyout agreement within the week. She also flagged the involvement of Mr. Whitfield as a potential ethics violation and contacted the Ohio State Bar. What she found when she started pulling the documents was worse than I had expected. The buyout document I'd been handed had not just been dated before my father's death. It included a signature on a codicil, a late amendment to my father's will, that transferred full operational authority to Conrad and reduced my ownership stake to 15%, a non-voting 15%. The signature was my father's, but the notarization date was a Saturday, and my father's home health aide, a woman named Gloria who had been with him for 8 months, told Patricia that my father had not had any business visitors that Saturday. She remembered because it had been his birthday, and she'd made him a cake, and they'd watched a baseball game, and he had been, she said, very tired that day. Very quiet. He would not have been signing legal documents. Forensic document examination takes time. I want you to understand that. It takes time and it costs money, and while it is happening, you are walking around in a world that looks completely normal, going to the grocery store, answering emails, watching people live their ordinary lives, and inside you are holding something that feels like it could break you open if you let it. I kept going to work. Conrad had not expected me to do that. He had expected the offer to land and for me to disappear gracefully, the way you disappear when someone has framed a betrayal as a favor. When I showed up Monday morning with my badge and my laptop, he was standing in the main hallway, and his face did something complicated that he quickly smoothed over. He said, "I thought you were taking some time." I said, "I'm here." I said nothing else. For 3 weeks, I said almost nothing to him. I did my work. I attended the meetings I was supposed to attend. I talked to the floor managers and the accounts team and the clients I had relationships with. I documented everything, every meeting, every email, every moment he tried to exclude me from a decision I had a legal right to be part of. I kept a log on a personal device, not on the company network. I emailed myself nightly summaries from a personal account. There were things I noticed during those weeks that I had not let myself notice before. The way certain employees looked at me differently now. Carefully, the way people look at someone they've been told might be leaving. The way Conrad had started signing correspondence as president and CEO when his title had always just been president. The way Mr. Whitfield seemed to have an office now, in the corner suite that had been used for client meetings. There was also a woman named Roseanne. Roseanne was Conrad's girlfriend. I had met her twice at family events and had no particular feelings about her either way. But Patricia, in pulling financial records, found that Roseanne had been added as a signatory on one of the company's secondary accounts 4 months before my father died. She had signing authority on an account that processed vendor payments. Patricia found 11 transactions over 3 months, totaling just under $90,000, paid to an LLC that had been incorporated in Delaware. The LLC had one member, Roseanne. I want to be honest with you about what I felt when I found that out. I expected to feel rage. I felt something quieter than that, something almost like grief, but turned sideways, because Conrad was not a stupid man. He was not reckless. He had done this deliberately, carefully, over a period of months while our father was dying. That took a kind of sustained intention that I could not fully process. Not then. Patricia brought in a forensic accountant. She also contacted the FBI field office in Cincinnati because the document fraud and the financial diversion taken together potentially crossed into federal territory. The FBI assigned an agent whose name I will call Special Agent Torres, not her real name, but she will understand if she ever sees this. She was methodical and she was kind and she did not make promises she couldn't keep. She told me the investigation would take time. She told me to keep going to work, keep documenting, and not to confront Conrad directly. I did not confront Conrad directly. What I did, 3 weeks into the investigation, was find the original copy of my father's will. My father had kept a fireproof safe in his home office. My mother had passed when I was 12, and after that my father had become meticulous about documents. He kept everything organized, labeled, updated. After he died, Conrad had taken most of the contents of the safe for estate purposes. But my father had also kept his secondary file box in the basement, behind the water heater, in a spot that I knew about because when I was 9 years old, I had hidden a library book back there, and my father had found it, and we had laughed about it together, and he had said, "This is where I keep the important things." He was joking. But after he said it, he had started using it. In that box, in a manila envelope labeled with my name in my father's handwriting, was a copy of his will dated 8 months before his death. It predated the codicil. It was notarized by Patricia. It divided the company equally between me and Conrad. It also included a handwritten note, folded inside. My father's handwriting had gotten harder to read in his last year. But I could read it. I had been reading his handwriting my whole life. The note said, "Lena, if you're reading this, something went wrong. I'm sorry I didn't say this out loud. You were always the one I trusted. The company is yours as much as his. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Dad, I sat on the basement floor for a long time. I thought about all the ways I could have missed this, all the ways I almost had. If I had taken the buyout that first Monday, before I'd called Patricia, before I knew about Mr. Whitfield, before any of it, the document would have been signed, the story would have been settled, and I would have spent years wondering why my father had chosen Conrad over me. I would have been wrong, but I would never have known I was wrong. That note was entered into evidence. The forensic examiner concluded that the signature on the codicil was inconsistent with my father's authentic signatures from the same period. Mr. Fend Whitfield was referred to the bar and subsequently surrendered his license. Roseanne was charged with wire fraud. Conrad was charged with fraud, forgery, financial elder abuse, and undue influence. He called me the night before the arraignment. I did not answer. He left a voicemail that started with my name and then said, "You have to understand, I thought I deleted it. I did not delete it because I didn't want to hear his explanation. I deleted it because I understood, finally, that his explanation was not something I needed. I had spent my whole life in some quiet corner of myself wondering if I was as capable as Conrad, as legitimate, as worthy of what my father had built. I had absorbed that doubt so gradually that I hadn't even known it was there until I was sitting across a conference table, watching a man I shared blood with try to hand me a pen and a diminished version of my own inheritance and call it clean. I didn't need his explanation. I already had my father's note. The trial took 14 months. I ran the company during those 14 months. I learned things about operations that I hadn't known before, not because I hadn't been capable of learning them, but because I had been kept at a certain distance for years. The floor managers, once they understood what had happened, were not surprised. One of them told me, quietly, that Conrad had told people I was planning to sell the company, that I didn't care about the workers, that I was going to take my half and liquidate. None of it was true. Conrad had known none of it was true. He had said it anyway, consistently, to the people whose respect I would have needed to run the company effectively. He had been undermining me long before our father got sick, long before there was a pen to sign. Conrad was convicted on 3 of the 4 charges. He was sentenced to 4 years. Roseanne pled guilty separately and received a suspended sentence with restitution. Mr. Dry Whitfield, in the end, cooperated with prosecutors and testified against Conrad in exchange for the bar referral being handled at the state level. I did not attend the sentencing. My attorney offered to take me, and I thought about it for a long time. I thought about what I would feel sitting in that room, watching the number of years get attached to my brother's name. I thought about whether I would feel relief or satisfaction or closure or any of the things people tell you that you're supposed to feel when justice happens. In the end, I stayed at work. There was a production issue with a client in Indianapolis, and I spent that afternoon on the phone, walking through a quality control problem with our floor supervisor. It was ordinary and necessary, and it was exactly where I needed to be. Special Agent Torres called me after the sentencing to let me know the outcome. She asked how I was doing. I told her I was fine, and I meant it in the particular way that fine means when it's not nothing, but it's not what you expected either. She said she was glad I hadn't given up in the early weeks, when everything was still uncertain. I said I had a note. She said she understood. I still have it. It's not in the basement anymore. It's in a frame in my office, behind my desk, where I see it every morning when I sit down. My father's handwriting, getting harder to read by the end, but clear enough. The words he wrote when he was scared and tired and not sure how things would go, the words he folded up and hid behind the water heater because he trusted me to find them. I run the company now. 214 employees as of last quarter. We just signed a contract with a regional aerospace supplier that my father had been trying to land for 6 years. I called my father's oldest client to tell him personally, and he went quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Your father would be proud." I said, "I know." I didn't cry until after I hung up, but I cried. Some things you carry forward, some things you put down. The difference, I've learned, is not about forgiveness or closure or any of the clean words people reach for when they want grief to have a shape. The difference is just about what you decide to keep building. My father built something real. So will I. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the sentencing. Not the day the forensic report came in. It's the 11 minutes I sat in that parking lot after Conrad handed me the pen. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there watching the clock, trying to find the version of events where I was wrong about what had just happened. I couldn't find it. And I think, looking back, that those 11 minutes were the most important of the whole thing, because I chose not to talk myself out of what I knew. That choice sounds small. It wasn't. Conrad had spent years making it easy for me to doubt myself. Not loudly, not cruelly, just steadily. The kind of erosion you don't notice until you're standing at the bottom of something and wondering how you got there. He had told the story of Lena, who wasn't really operational, so many times to so many people that it had started to feel like a fact of nature rather than a lie someone had constructed. And if I had signed that day, that lie would have become my reality. Not because it was true, because I would have let it stand. What stopped me wasn't courage exactly. It was something quieter, a refusal to betray what I actually knew. My father had not been the kind of man who would say I wasn't built for this. I knew that the way I knew his handwriting, and knowing it, and choosing to act on it rather than swallow it to keep the peace, that was the first step toward everything that followed. Patricia found the fraud because she was meticulous and principled and had documented a meeting she could have just as easily let go. Gloria remembered a birthday cake and a baseball game and a man who was too tired to sign anything that day. Special Agent Torres worked the case month after month without shortcuts. The whole thing unraveled not because of one dramatic moment, but because multiple people chose at different points to do the careful right thing when the easier wrong thing was available. I think about that a lot now. Conrad was intelligent. He understood the company, understood the legal structures, understood exactly which levers to pull. But he used that intelligence in the service of something that could not hold, because the people around him were also paying attention, also thinking, also keeping records. Intelligence without integrity doesn't fail spectacularly. It fails incrementally, document by document, until one day there's a forensic accountant and a conference room and a note behind a water heater and nowhere left to go. The thing about a betrayal that builds slowly is that the recovery also builds slowly. I didn't wake up the morning after the conviction feeling like myself again. I went to work. I solved a production problem. I called a client. I did the next thing, and then the next, for months. Until one day I looked up and realized I had built something. Not just kept something, but actually built it forward. My father's note is framed behind my desk, not as a trophy, as a reminder that someone saw clearly and wrote it down and trusted me to find it. That kind of trust doesn't come from nowhere. You earn it quietly over years by being the person who shows up and does the work and does the do work and doesn't disappear when it gets hard. That's the only inheritance that can't be forged.